Hey guys, name is David Reyes. I'm in the Law at Mar Masters of Education and Leadership Department. This is my PASL video number one. I am currently working at Kaufman High School. My position is Dean of Students here, where I have more of an administrative role. I'm over the seniors' discipline as well as truancy and little things here and there, timesheets. But more importantly, I do help out on the instructional side with the mathematics department as well as other departments, gathering data and creating a strategic approach to where we're going curriculum wise within Kaufman High School. Kaufman High School is a A-rated campus. We have been for the past couple years. I taught here before. This is my first year in an administrative role, but it is my third year here at Kaufman High School. I've taught Algebra 1 and actually taught with some of the teachers who are in the video, which you're about to see. And a lot of the data collection and the decisions that we've made curriculum wise based off of data will be reflective in our video today. And it's actually a lot of the stuff that I help implement here at Kaufman High School. Just a little bit of past history. I've taught at other campuses, primarily in Dallas ISD, which is where I picked up a lot of the data driven and the backwards design that we kind of talk about and mention in the video. The teachers that I use today are Miss Leslie Rivers. Miss Rivers, she teaches an RTI class for our Algebra 1 students who were not successful last year, as well as on-level Algebra 1 students. She does have a mixture of classes, and then she does have true Algebra 1 students that she's kind of working with this year. And then Miss Alvarez, Miss Mariel Alvarez is the second teacher who's in the video. She's also a Algebra 1 teacher, and that's all she has. She doesn't do RTI. Just a breakdown of what you'll see in the video. I do have, I pulled state data in regards to economically disadvantaged students. I pulled it through the TA website. It was kind of I felt it was necessary in the angle I was trying to approach it. I am going more towards the vertical alignment aspect of it, and that's kind of where we're going to go in video 2 and 3, is seeing how we can use that vertical alignment to help give our students, who haven't been successful in the past or who just, are not as blessed as other students at home, to try to help them give the edge for this STAR test this year. After looking at the STAR state exam data, then we dive further into the local data. So our actual high school and how we did last year with our economically disadvantaged students, and how we're planning on creating a system to make that better. My mentor, principal, his campus principal, we've kind of talked about it. Our economically disadvantaged students didn't do too terribly bad last year, so our needs assessment is more focused on growing the students to grade level that meets or mastery. So that's why I pulled the meets data from TEA over economically disadvantaged students, and that's kind of what we begin the video with my teachers focusing on that. Once we go into the local data, I look at the approaches, meets, and masters. We kind of talk about those, and we keep our focus around the meets so that it's aligned with the state data that I've already pulled. And then the local data, we're going to look at that meets masters, as I mentioned, on video 2 and 3, and how we can implement both resources and strategies throughout the year to help get more of our economically disadvantaged students towards that mastery goal. Thank you.
So here we have one of the charts that I introduced into the meeting. It's actually the first chart that we used. I pulled it from TEA. This is highlighting the economically disadvantaged based off of the STAR scores since 2019. I wanted to get a baseline information with our data meeting at the very beginning to get a broad scope of the data. So as you can tell from here, I kind of wanted our teachers to take a look at this for themselves first and try to come up with any trends. This one does go into all four EOCs at the high school level. You have your Algebra 1, which is the subject we're focusing on here. You have English 1 and 2, as well as Biology and U.S. History. What I wanted the PLC to primarily get out of this, and I kind of tried to use question stems to point them in the right direction, is the pre-COVID versus post-COVID. Now, as everybody was looking at the pre and post-COVID, you can tell um, all subjects had that initial drop, and then they started to come up. And I'm not sure, the policies behind it, but once the scores actually started coming up, it was the star redesign that kind of started making either scores go down in some instances or just stay pretty even. So I give this to algebra teachers simply to give them a scope and an idea of while everybody else was going down across the state, they actually had gains here, which was good for them. After we looked at the state level, we then took a close look at the local level. So this is the resource that they were talking about in the video where they were kind of looking at Kaufman High School as how they compared last year, highlighting the economically disadvantaged. Here you can see the total number of students that we had was 276. And then, of course, with the meets level from the data before, which is what we're primarily looking at, the and on grade level students. The meets level here was at 47.83 for Kaufman High School last year for the economic disadvantaged students. In the second video we're going to create after looking at the initial data, we're actually going to look into what resources we had last year, which made us so successful, as well as what resources we can add to this upcoming year to help reach that growth goal that we did discuss towards the end of our meeting. After looking at our local data, the next resource that came up was their actual first test that they had this year. It was actually 3 weeks ago. It was over solving equations and inequalities. The data charts I went ahead and pulled, and this is kind of what they're discussing as they went into not only the overall trend of these students coming in this year, but in the second clip that I kind of spliced into this video, where they went into their individual data based off of test one, solving equations and inequalities. I did want to point out, and as I reaffirmed with our teachers in the video, that this was one of the low teaks from last year. A couple of the teaks that they had on here were not tested last year. However, based off of my knowledge from teaching this, the teaks that were not tested last year were definitely prerequisites into the teaks that they had to master for this year. So that vertical alignment piece was there, and we use this data set just to highlight the achievements that they've already been able to accomplish this year coming into a new year. And the goals that we created was based off of this data assessment here. And I'm actually looking very forward to seeing their progression throughout the year. Now that you're able to look over the resources that we covered in this meeting, let's go ahead and introduce the PLC that actually recorded for PASL video number 1.
All right, guys, thank y'all for joining today. We are going to go over a couple of data points that we had last year and this year, as well as state and local. Today I have a couple of our teachers on campus. I have Miss Mariel Alvarez. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Mariel Alvarez, Algebra 1 teacher.
And we also have Miss Leslie Rivers.
Leslie Rivers, also Algebra 1 teacher.
And then myself, David Reyes. I'm a PASL candidate going through Lamar University. So now we have our introductions. Kind of want to establish a norm for our meetings. The biggest norm that I want to make sure that we go through is be open-minded. And with this being actual data, as usual, confidentiality for both our students as well as previous schools that we have worked at. So what I want to start with today is we're going to take a look at the state data, so the economically disadvantaged that we pulled from TEA. If we want to kind of work together to take a look at that, I'm going to give you all about 2 minutes just to kind of look at that graph and try to come up with a pattern that's been happening. This is pre-COVID data as well as some data from last year from the state. So tell me, what do y'all notice specifically here?
After COVID, there was a big drop in the Algebra 1 scores.
And it's been going up, but
Slowly.
except for this last 2024.
Why do y'all think that big change between 2022 and 2023 kind of came in? What was that big change?
From 22 to 23.
Yeah,
The new item type questions.
yeah, that's the biggest thing. I know the state, previous district I worked at, that was a lot of their reasoning behind that, as what we were told, both from the administrative side as well as the teacher side. And then this chart here, it actually dives into different EOCs, not just algebra. So we do have Algebra 1 on here. We have English 1 and English 2. We have biology as well as U.S. history. And then this chart does go specifically into economically disadvantaged. Now, the biggest thing I want to point out here is these are percentages, but they're not percentages of passing. Rather, they're percentages of MET grade level. So kind of go into what MET grade level means. What does that mean to you, Ms. Alvarez?
That they were able to meet every single standard and get the correct answer on it.
Yeah, very good. So as we know, we have the three achievement levels. We have our approaches, we have our meets, and we have our standard, our mastery level. So last year, just putting in perspective, before we do our local deep dive, what was our state percentage for meets for our economically disadvantaged?
According
For
to
algebra, yes.
35.
35.
Yeah, 35%. So TA released this actually within the past couple of weeks, but the state did come through at 35% met for our economically disadvantaged. We are going to dive into our local data now. So this is our EOC for 2024, primarily looking at our economically disadvantaged. Now, we will kind of bring up some other subpopulations, just the percentages overall, so we can kind of contextualize what exactly is going on here with all of our students versus our specific subpopulations, such as economically disadvantaged. So in this first chart here, we do have spring 2024 STAR EOC Algebra 1. I want y'all to kind of discuss for a little while just the different subpopulations and comparison to our economically disadvantaged. So where the economically disadvantaged kind of came in at the approaches level, at the meets level, at the mastery level, and then we'll kind of finish this section up comparing it to our state economically disadvantaged data. So what do y'all notice about the subpops?
Well, 47% is pretty good numbers.
Yeah, so that 47%
For meets.
and that's meets for our local district. That's not bad at all. A lot higher than the state. What about approaches? What y'all notice there?
Pretty high, 85.51%.
Yeah, our economically disadvantaged did very well last year in regards to the approaches category. What about comparing them to other subpops? Did they kind of do the better of the subpopulations? Were they the lower end or kind of there in the median?
It's almost in the middle. Yeah,
I would say median.
I'd say median.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of different data that we covered through our program at Lamar. We specifically looked into the economic disadvantage just to kind of see, how we're doing with different case studies. And I will say, for the meets level at 47.83% for our STAR last year with the new item types, that was pretty impressive. Now, there's obviously room for growth, which is what we'll kind of cover within the next two videos that we will be recording after today. One thing that I did want to point out was the economically disadvantaged students in comparison to our total population of students who took the Algebra 1 test. So out of all of our students, let's see, how many testers did we have last year, Ms. Rivers?
375.
Very good. And then our economically disadvantaged, how many did we have?
276.
Yeah, so when we did the calculations, we're at about 74% of our student population is economically disadvantaged. Okay, before we go into our data from this year, I do want to give the teachers a chance to kind of talk about a couple of students in their classes and some of the data points that they have. We are going to be referring to one of the exams that they took actually about 4 weeks ago. It is their first exam for this year. They're solving equations and solving inequalities. Ms. Alvarez, do you want to kind of talk about your low tester real quick? Once again, keeping confidentiality in mind, just kind of mentioning any misconceptions that you kind of saw.
So the main misconception for this particular student was combining like terms, because they were trying to solve, because we did solving as well, so they got those two mixed up. When it came to combining the like terms and knowing when to do the inverse operation, she mixed that up.
Okay.
So that was the main one. And also on anything that had to deal with a fraction was a misconception as well. I don't know, I think she saw a fraction and freaked out and didn't know how to approach the problem.
For sure. Ms. Rivers, do you want to talk a little bit about your low-performing student that you have today?
So this particular student, anytime a variable did not have a number in front, they treated it as 0 instead of 1. And so when they were combining like terms, they did not actually add the 1 to the other number on both questions that were like that. And then on inequalities, rewriting it correctly, when to flip the sign, and versus when not to flip the sign.
Okay.
For the biggest.
Thank you for sharing that. It sounds like both of y'all's examples that you brought in today kind of are struggling on the same prerequisite knowledge. I know vertical alignment is something that we talk about a lot here, both in the departments, in math department as well as other departments, and even district-wide. That's a lot of the stuff we've been covering this year in the summer as well as leading into the fall semester. If you will, Ms. Alvarez, just kind of talk about the vertical alignment piece, some of the stuff that they're messing up, and when you think, in your opinion, some of that information is taught, if it's previous grade levels or if you feel like this is all just new to Algebra 1.
No, definitely just even order of operation PEMDAS from 5th grade, they have trouble with that, which is it's included with the distributed property and combining like terms. Putting those coefficients in front of the variables also is previously taught in 7th and 8th grade. I think those are the main ones when they see it. I know they see it early on in elementary school, and then but just with numbers only, no variables, and then later in middle school they do see the expressions with variables in them. So it is something that they've seen before. They're just having trouble with combining them. And I guess because now we made them solve and we had multiple TEKs at once in one single test, they were getting it confused.
Okay. Ms. Rivers, I know, so Ms. Rivers is joining us this year. She worked with us a couple years back and then went to another district last year and is actually returned to us this year. If you don't mind, Ms. Rivers, she does teach some of our RTI students, students that were not successful last year, who are kind of mixed in with students who are taking the Algebra 1 START test again this year, and students that are taking it for the first time. If you don't mind just kind of covering what you see with your RTI students compared to what you see for students who are taking it for the first time.
With my RTI students, they are still struggling with inverse operation with solving. And so I try to really stress that because it helps me in my first time learners to make sure that they understand what an inverse operation is, so that hopefully they don't have that misconception. And I feel like my first timers, because I really drilled it, picked up on it better than the bad habits that they were taught prior and didn't remember. Even though this entire unit was 8th grade carried over, they do learn these in 8th grade. They solve inequalities and equations just like these in 8th grade. So most students should have seen it before, just like the RTI, but just the reminders of what is an inverse operation and when to perform it. When there's not a plus sign in front of a number, realizing that positives aren't going to have a plus sign in front of it, so you subtract that's the biggest thing I see.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So I know one of the things that I previously discussed is the vertical alignment piece. I did teach for about 8 years. I've taught all the way down from 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, and then taught high school as well. And everywhere I've been, I've got to say this department, our Algebra 1 department, is one of the strongest when it comes to data and analyzing the vertical alignment pieces. So I thank y'all once again for coming. What I want to do now is kind of lead into the other spectrum of our economically disadvantaged students. So we're going to have a chance to talk about the students that perform on the higher end for Ms. Alvarez. If you don't mind going through that page really quick. The main things that we want to look for, one is the obvious differences between the higher end students who scored higher versus the lower end students who didn't necessarily be as successful on this exam.
So for my higher student, she only messed up in one of the solving equations, and that is because it was a fraction, but they were supposed to get rid of the multiplying first as opposed to the other fractions where they will get rid of the constant first. So that was the main difference. They struggled with it throughout the review, and we did plenty of examples. I make sure I put it on the review and in all the assignments, and it was just something that they always thought that the number that was being added or subtracted is you're supposed to get rid of that one first, but I always told them get rid of the lonely number, the one without the X. So that was one of the things I pointed out, but she still managed to mess that one up.
Okay, and that was the only one she missed there?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Everything else she did, all the combining like terms and inequalities was fine, rewriting the statement, everything was perfect except for the fraction one.
Okay. Now, in regards, well, actually, we'll hold off on that question real quick. Ms. Rivers, I want to see what did you notice between your high and your low performing?
So I actually have their reviews attached here as well, and my higher student listed all the steps on their review, as where my lower one didn't. So I feel like they were more prepared for the test because they listed everything, and their work is more organized, and with the steps I can see where those mistakes were a lot easier. Some of these, they have the right answer on paper, but when the answer choice was reversed with the variable being in front, they picked the wrong answer even though on the paper it was right. And so that's more of, I think, just with everything going from paper to computers is where some of the mistakes happen.
Okay.
Because the answer was right here and they picked the wrong one.
Gotcha, and that's definitely something we're going to take a look at leading into STAR because a lot of their scratch work is done on paper versus actually clicking in the correct response for the STAR test. So I would say, and I'm glad I actually gave you a chance to talk before because you pretty much said what I was going to say regarding the structure of the actual solution. So it seems like the ones who are getting on both of y'all's the higher end of the test grade, they are showing more work, right? The procedures are down versus some of the ones that are on the opposite end, maybe not putting as many steps down or possibly taking their time. We'll spend some more time on video too, looking more into the reasoning behind the data. I do want to kind of bring back together our overall data for that first test now that we've had both teachers kind of talk about what they were covering themselves. So on test one, the solvent equations and inequalities, we went ahead and pulled their data from that test. The economically disadvantaged students, this is going to be on that last page. The economically disadvantaged students had a percent score, so an average score of 68.13. They also had approaches grade level at 89.12 and a meets level of 69.95 and our mastery level at 52.33. Of course, just going back over approaches, meets, and masters. Approaches is the state passing standard. Our meets will be that on grade level, and that's where we want all of our students to be, especially the ones who were below performing last year. And the mastery, for the ones that did hit that meets last year, we want them getting mastery. So half of the students actually took the test, a little more than half mastered this exam. So looking further into the actual TEKS that were on the test, Ms. Alvarez, do you mind kind of going through the TEKS that were listed on that test?
A5A at 67.62%, A5B 63.6, A10A 69.56, A10D 75%.
All right, thank you. So yes, these were the actual TEKS. Here in Kaufman, we do use Eduphoria. It's a WARE program in Eduphoria to actually give our exams, and it helps us get our data and export it onto graphs and charts, which we then use for PLCs. So comparing that to our STAR data from last year, we went ahead and took out the TEKS, the data from last year. Ms. Alvarez, do you mind going through the TEKS that we performed last year on the STAR test? The percentages.
Okay. So for A5A, we had 51.85%. A5B was not tested. A10A 44.81%, and then A10D was not tested this last year.
Okay, and as we cover as well in our PLCs with the frequency tables, some of the ones that aren't tested, of course, are definitely our prerequisite knowledge for the readiness and the more heavier TEKS as we get closer to STAR. So even though it says not tested, I assure you these are vertically aligned and backwards designed from the STAR test. So I kind of want to leave an open forum, if you will, just open communication on Ms. Alvarez. You were here last year, and then obviously you're here at the beginning of this year. To have such a tremendous growth on the SE for last year, A5A for instance, solvent equations. Last year we came in at 51.85% on the STAR test. However, this test, y'all performed 67.62. Was there anything that you noticed between last year and this year that y'all did differently that helped that achievement?
We started using IXL in the classroom. It was one of the issues that we had because we had so many gaps in between that I think that it helped for them to check and be at their own level on all the easier questions. So for those that needed the easy questions, like the one-step equations, the two-step equations, and the multi-step equations, I feel like that might have made an impact. That's the one thing that I noticed that we did different from last year. Last year we did not have access to IXL. We also used supplemental assignments from Delta Math, and that makes some immediate feedback as soon as they finish a problem, and if it's incorrect, it gives them an example. And we also offer more tutoring. We call home for missing assignments. I feel like that, as far as on my behalf, I've been more taking more initiative of communicating with parents whenever they had any missing assignments or failed quizzes and corrections. After this, we corrected the test as well, and most of my kids came in for corrections and after school.
All right. Thank you for sharing. So one of the biggest things and the reasonings behind these meetings, we do kind of want to create a needs for the economically disadvantaged and create short-term and long-term goals. As I stated earlier, last year our meets for the STAR test for our economically disadvantaged was at 47.83. With the growth already shown this year, I do want to kind of put into documentation that we are going to try to get that to at least 60% this year. We are going to be bringing new resources in, as Ms. Alvarez has already spoken about, and we will get more in detail during our next meeting, our next video that we're going to record. And then I would even go on a limb to say for the mastery level, last year we came in around 21% for our economically disadvantaged. I feel just from seeing the interactions between our teachers and students, as well as the can-do spirit that our teachers have already started this year, I feel like the mastery level could easily become 30% or higher. We'll continue to track this throughout the year, and then we'll continue to have these little meetings as well, both on and off video, to try to gauge our growth of our students. Now, one thing I do want to point out, and it's just the math background in me, anytime we compare last year's data to this year's data, there is some room for discrepancies. We have different sets of students coming through each year, but this is a very good starting point in regards to bringing in new resources, attacking the curriculum different ways, and really looking at that potential growth for harder thinking questions, or even some project-based activities that we can implement to try to get them to that next level of understanding on both DOK as well as Bloom's. Here in Kaufman, we use Bloom's a lot, but we're trying to move towards DOK. Before we leave for today, I want to give both y'all an opportunity to kind of reflect over the goals we've created today, and then without going too far into resources that we might want to bring in, since we are going to cover that in video number 2, what ways we can kind of tackle trying to get to that 60% meets and that 30% mastery just from the curriculum aspect of it. So if y'all want to kind of have an open communication on how we could possibly do that this year to try to get this goal obtainable.
Well, I think the kids like the gallery walk that we did before this test, because it got them out of their chair.
Actively engage in walking, and everybody was working.
And you're not just sitting in a desk all day, and we were still covering it was 1 and 2 step equations, and it was like a little scavenger hunt we did out in the hall. And I felt like they were working together and asking each other for help, and versus coming to me. And I feel like when they help each other, I see more growth that way than when they come and ask me. Okay, looking at test 1, solving equations and inequalities, just my economically disadvantaged students, I had a total of 57 take this test. Out of that 57, only 5 did not meet. I had 6 approaching the grade level, 12 that met the grade level, and 34 were able to master all the TEKS on this test.
On the same test, I had 95 economically disadvantaged, 5 did not meet, 19 had approaches level, 19 had meets level, and 52 had masters.
All right. So if y'all will now, go ahead and click the show percent button at the top so we can kind of take a look at the percentages that it kind of came through at. Leslie, if you don't mind, tell us what your approaches percentage was for economically disadvantaged.
My approaches percentage was 10.5%.
Very good. And then Miss Alvarez, what were yours at?
20%.
Thank you. And then Leslie, moving to the meets category.
I had 21.1%.
Very good.
20%.
20%. All right. And then for our mastery,
I had 59.6%.
59.6. And Miss Alvarez?
54.7%.
54.7%. So once again, kind of going back over the goals. We're going for 60% meets. Miss Rivers, you were right there. I mean, you're at 21% meets. However, that's not even including the ones that were on the mastery level. So you're definitely right around the meets goal that we've already established now at the very beginning. Miss Alvarez, you're the same. So you're at 20% meets with your 54.7% mastery. So combined, that has you over your meets goal as well. For the mastery goal, we did kind of talk about that 30%. Both of y'all kind of knocked that out the park. Miss Rivers, you were at that 59.6%, and Miss Alvarez, you were at that 54.7%. Now, I will say, and actually I'll ask, so with these, did we use the same item types as that were available, or what item types did we use?
We did have a drag and drop for the inequality, which was one of the main misconceptions. They didn't know how to, I guess, answer the question. Even though they had it correct on paper, some of them just missed it based on the drag and drop. But that was the main one, right?
That was
we
the
had.
yes.
Okay.
And because we noticed on STAR, the drag and drop questions tend to be lower, even if they know the answer.
Okay. Yeah, and I know in y'all's PLC in the summer, and even at the beginning when we came back, y'all were looking into the lowest mistakes, and they actually did a cross analysis with not only the frequency of the teaks themselves, but also with the item types. And Miss Alvarez, in that meeting, I know y'all kind of talked about the drag and drop from last year. Do you want to kind of talk about that question that we had identified, which was drag and drop from last year's STAR?
With the inequalities?
Yes.
So they had every single type of inequality, including the equal sign on there as well. And I think, and we even put it on ours too, just to make sure. We wanted to see how many of the kids will pick the equal sign. I remember us discussing that. And then in the summer, we talked about all those questions, that anything that has to deal with any interactive, mainly. It was just the kids tend to do lower on.
Yeah.
And drag and drop was one of the main ones. It has many options. It's just not the A, B, and C. They have to put the X in the correct spot. They have to put the inequality in the correct spot, and then it has to have also, the family of solutions, the number, whatever they're using for the inequality. We didn't have any graphing the actual line, but just from solving, that was hard enough for them, and it still shows as of right now. I think it's one of the lowest ones we had.
Okay. Yeah, and as I said before, the math department and this algebra team, they are always they're not looking to back down. The drag and drop, as she said, was one of the lowest. That was one of the ones we talked about at the beginning PLC, and the fact that they had inputted that into this test and still had such tremendous numbers is a huge testament to what y'all been doing every day. We are very appreciative of what y'all are doing, and I just want y'all to know that y'all are well within the realm of meeting these goals for this year. So just continue to do what you do. Next video, once again, we will dive into what other resources we can add to this and make this more successful. So something else we are pushing this year for our teachers is really taking a look at Domain 2 and Domain 3 on our T-test goals and appraisals. So that definitely feeds straight into Domain 2 and 3, with these students kind of leading the instructional atmosphere rather than the teacher. Usually in the project-based, Ms. Alvarez, which I know you did a couple projects last year, the teachers are traditionally more facilitators rather than actual lecturers. Granted, there are some days that in PBL or PRBL that teachers become lecturers. However, the overall concept of PBL is having the students lead their learning. And I know that's one of the biggest things that the math department is looking into this year, that I'm really excited to see how that kind of cultivates throughout the year. I want to thank you all again for coming today and kind of sharing this information and being a part of this video. We will be in touch regarding our growth goals that we have created, as well as how we can make that into fruition. Do y'all have any other questions before we leave today? Okay. All right. Well, thank y'all once again, and y'all have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now that the first video is over, I kind of wanted to spend some time reflecting and just giving some conclusion and ending statements in regards to video number 1. I know that I had to go back and actually record a second clip after I was reviewing everything that we had talked about. I noticed I did kind of skip over one of the steps that I wanted to implement, which is where we reviewed the individual teachers' total grades and breakdown of data for test 1. So we went into state data, then local data from last year, and then we kind of led into the data for the upcoming kids this year who are going to take the 2025 STAR. Our video once again was over Algebra 1. In this department, like I said before, I did work in this department before, and being a part of them as a teacher and now being a part of them as sort of an administrative role it's very eye-opening. As a teacher, you obviously want to do right by your students, and then as kind of my position now as dean of students, I'm more over multiple students within the school district, within the school, the high school. But it does. I do like the administrative side of my job, where I can actually start coaching these teachers up, and giving them tools that I found throughout my years of teaching. It was different. It was different, kind of taking that PLC model. A lot of the PLC model that I took was from Dallas ISD, which is where I did a lot of my foundational teaching at, as well as stepping into leadership roles out there, such as instructional coaches or department heads, and just the whole PLC model and structure that Dallas has. I kind of implemented here as a teacher, and then now as an administrative sort. So it's different bringing that here with some teachers who are used to just having kind of a looser structure about them. My mentor principal is actually, this is his second year here, and I'm very excited to be a part of his team, both last year through the internship, as well as stepping into this dean of students role, and eventually an assistant principal role once I graduate from Lamar. So the system I put in place here, I love looking at teachers' individual data. It gives them a chance to be accountable, as well as kind of talk about it on a non-judgmental atmosphere. So you'll notice a lot of the conversations regarding their individual data did come kind of with respect to others, which is what we've always implemented here. And I was stressing the importance of that as a teacher. Just being able to, hey, show your data, I'll show you mine. What are you good at? What do I need help at? And leading with those points rather than trying to be that teacher, that administrator who's just my way, my way, my way. I really do believe it's very important for all teachers to have voice in the type of PLC or the next steps that we will be implementing. So that's why I kind of added that last piece in there. Like I said, I had it planned before, but obviously leading a PLC in person versus recording a PLC are a little bit different, and it's definitely something I'm gonna get used to. So if you don't mind, just bear with me in video 1. Hopefully video 2 and 3 will go a little bit more smoother. It was very tempting at times to kind of use the next step model, which is in that PLC model. You find a problem, you find a needs assessment, you gather data evidence of that problem, and then it's natural to kind of move into that next step. I know video 2 is going to be all about that, and just kind of trying to hold back in video 1 was one of the challenges that I had here. But I love the experience. I love the experience of being able to lead these teachers, and I'm very excited how well these teachers are going to do this year with our students. Our students are very lucky to have these teachers in our Algebra 1 department. Thank you, and I look forward to continuing one in this practicum, and to obviously create videos 2 and 3 with these teachers. Thank you.